The great house of Ashworth stood upon a hill, and on the night of the summer ball, every window burned with light. Carriages rolled up the long drive, their wheels crunching over gravel that had been raked smooth that morning by boys who now stood watching from the stables, still in their working clothes. The smell of horse and hay mixed with the drift of roses from the garden. And above it all came the sound of violins, thin and sweet, floating out through the open doors. Inside the ballroom the air was thick. Wax dripped from 100 candles set in tall silver stands, and the smell of burning tallow mixed with perfume and powder, and the faint sourness of too many bodies in too small a space. Silk rustled. Fans snapped open and closed. Laughter rose in bright bursts and fell again. The floor shone from wax and polish, and the shoes of the dancing pairs made a soft, steady sound as they turned. Vivienne Marchant stood near the tall window at the far end of the room. She was not hiding. She was simply standing where the light of the candles did not quite reach, where the drape of a heavy velvet curtain gave her a small pocket of shadow. She had learned, over many such evenings, that if a woman stood very still and did not draw the eye, she could pass a whole night this way. No one asked her to dance. No one asked her name. No one seemed to notice she was there at all. She was not ugly. Her hair was a soft brown that shone when the light caught it, and her eyes were the color of tea held up to the sun. Her gown was plain but well made, the color of pale wheat, without lace or ribbon or any of the small tricks that other girls use to catch a passing gaze. She had no fortune. Her father, a widowed vicar, had sent her here to stay with her aunt for the season, in the hope that some kind gentleman might see her. It had been 6 weeks. No one had. She reached up and adjusted the small pearl button at the wrist of her left glove, then the right. This was her habit. When she felt too seen, or not seen enough, she smoothed the gloves down her arms with slow, careful fingers, as if she were dressing for the first time all over again. It gave her something to do with her hands. It kept her breath steady. Tonight she had done it 7 times already, and the night was still young. Beyond the window, the garden lay in soft dark. She could see the pale shapes of stone benches and the black shapes of yew hedges, and beyond them the low stone wall that ran along the edge of the orchard. Somewhere out there was the row of small cottages where the household servants lived, and beyond those, the old wooden shed where she had spent every free afternoon of the past 2 weeks. She thought of the shed now, and of the child who would be waiting there tomorrow, and she felt her shoulders drop half an inch. His name was Thomas. He was 7 years old, thin as a bird, with dark hair that never lay flat. His mother had died of fever in the spring, and no one seemed to know who his father had been. He belonged to no one, and so he belonged to the estate, which meant he slept in a corner of the stable and ate what the kitchen boys spared him. Vivienne had come upon him one afternoon in the orchard, sitting alone under an apple tree, tracing letters in the dirt with a stick. He had looked up at her with dark, solemn eyes and had not run away. She had asked him what he was writing. He had said, in a small, clear voice, that he did not know. He had only seen the shapes on a broken piece of a book that had blown into the yard, and he had copied them without knowing what they said. She had knelt down beside him in the grass, not caring about her hem, and she had asked him if he would like to learn. He had nodded once, slowly, as though he did not quite believe she meant it. That had been 2 weeks ago. Every afternoon since, she had come to the old shed behind the orchard, and Thomas had come too. And she had brought a slate and a piece of chalk and a small book of her own from childhood, and she had taught him. First the sounds of the letters, then the shapes. He learned quickly, faster than she had thought a child could learn, because he wanted it more than any child she had ever met. A movement near the great doors of the ballroom pulled her back to the present. The music did not stop, but something in the room changed. She could feel it more than see it. A small shift in how people held themselves, a slight lowering of voices, a turning of heads that pretended not to turn. The Duke of Ashworth had come in. Vivienne had never seen him before. He had been away, they said, at his estate in the north, and then in London on some matter of business. And then somewhere else again. He had inherited the title only a year before, upon the death of his older brother, and rumour said he had not wanted it. Rumour said many things. Vivienne did not usually listen to rumour. But she looked at him now, from her small pocket of shadow, and she understood at once that half of what was said about him was probably true, and the other half probably wrong. Because he was not the sort of man that words fit neatly around. He was not classically handsome. His nose had been broken once and set slightly off. His mouth was firm and rather grave. His hair was dark and had not been curled or oiled the way the other gentlemen's had. He wore black, plainly cut, without ornament. But he took up space in a way that had nothing to do with his size, though he was tall. When he stepped into a room, the room shaped itself around him without being asked. Every servant along the wall shifted an inch, not from fear but from long habit, the way a dog raises its head when its master passes. His name was Cassian Halbrook, Duke of Ashworth. She had heard it 3 times already this evening from her aunt. He did not smile. He nodded to the hostess. He accepted a glass of wine from a footman without looking at him. And then he stood, quite still, and let his gaze move over the room. He looked at no one in particular. He looked at everyone. His face gave nothing away. Several mothers began at once to steer their daughters gently in his direction. Vivienne watched this with the tired amusement of a woman who has watched it many times. A blonde girl in blue was pushed forward first, laughing too brightly at something no one had said. A dark-haired girl in white followed, holding a fan she did not know how to use. The Duke acknowledged them both with a small bow and said nothing. He did not offer his arm. He did not ask for a dance. He simply stood there, and after a moment his gaze moved on, past them, across the room, and it stopped. It stopped on her. Vivienne felt it before she quite understood what she was feeling. A weight, gentle but real, resting on her from across the room. She did not look away, because to look away would be to admit she had noticed, and she had learned long ago never to admit that. She let her own eyes rest for 1 heartbeat longer on the candle beside her. Then she looked back. He was still watching her. He watched her for what felt like a very long time, long enough that the blonde girl in blue turned, following his gaze, and frowned when she saw where it landed, long enough that Vivienne's aunt, 3 feet away and unaware, sipped her punch without noticing. Long enough that Vivienne herself had time to think, quite clearly, he cannot mean me. He must be looking past me. There must be someone behind me. But she knew, in the small honest place at the center of her chest, that there was no one behind her. There was only the velvet curtain and the dark window and the garden beyond. And then he moved. He walked across the ballroom in a straight line. He did not turn aside for the daughters of earls. He did not stop to greet old friends. He walked past the little group that had been arranged to catch him, past the punch table, past the pillar where 2 dowagers whispered behind their fans, and he came to a stop in front of her. The nearest people had begun to notice by now. Heads turned. A small silence spread from him outward, the way rings spread in water from a dropped stone. Vivienne felt the eyes on her back, on her sides, on her hands, which she had folded very carefully in front of her so that they would not shake. He bowed. It was a proper bow, neither too deep nor too shallow. "Miss Marchant," he said. His voice was low and even. It carried no more than it needed to. He said her name as though he had known it for a long time. Vivienne did not curtsy at once. She looked at him. She looked at his face, at the small line between his brows, at the mouth that did not smile. She was very aware of her breath, and of the pearl buttons at her wrists, and of the fact that she had not been introduced to this man and could not think of any way he should know her name. "Your Grace," she said. Her voice came out steady. She was proud of that, in a small, tired way. She curtsied then, exactly as she had been taught, no more and no less. He did not speak for a moment. He seemed to be waiting to see what she would do next. When she did nothing, he said, "You have not danced tonight." "No, Your Grace." "Do you not care for dancing?" "I care for it well enough." She did not smile. She did not blush. She kept her hands folded and her eyes on his. But dancing requires a partner, and one does not walk about the room asking gentlemen for the favor. His mouth did something that was almost, but not quite, a smile. It was gone before she could be sure of it. "No," he said. "One does not." The silence stretched. He did not feel it. She did not feel it either. She had learned that trick from her father, that silences were only awkward if you agreed to be embarrassed by them. "Your gloves," he said at last. She looked down without meaning to. Her hands were folded in front of her, and the small pearl buttons caught the candlelight. "You have adjusted them several times this evening," he said. "I wondered if they were troubling you." Heat climbed the back of her neck. She raised her chin. "They are not troubling me, Your Grace. It is a habit." "A habit?" "Yes. Why?" She looked at him. It was a rude question by any measure of polite society, and she should have been offended. She found, to her surprise, that she was not. She was only tired. "Because," she said quietly, "when one stands still and watches other people for a long time, one must give one's hands something to do. Otherwise they begin to feel as if they do not belong to you." He was silent. His eyes had not left her face. She saw, for the first time, that they were not brown as she had thought, but a very dark grey, almost the color of wet slate. "I see," he said. That was all. Just those two small words. Someone laughed too loudly across the room, and the moment broke. He bowed again, very slightly. He did not ask her to dance. He did not ask if he might call on her. He simply looked at her for one heartbeat more, and then he turned and walked away, and the tide of the ballroom closed around the space where he had been standing. Vivienne stood where she was. She did not move. She adjusted the small pearl button at her left wrist, once, and then folded her hands again. Her aunt turned 3 seconds later, having only just noticed. "Vivienne," she hissed. "Was that? Did the Duke of Ashworth just—" "Yes, aunt. What did he say to you?" "He asked why I had not danced. And I told him I had not been asked." Her aunt stared at her with an expression that suggested she was calculating something very quickly. Then she said, in the flat voice of a woman who has decided not to have a conversation just now, "We will speak of this at home." They did not speak of it at home. Her aunt, on the ride back, was too full of her own thoughts, and Vivienne was too full of hers. She stared out of the carriage window at the pale road going by, and she felt, for the first time in 6 weeks, that something in her chest was not quite where it had been. She did not sleep well. She rose early. And she went, as she went every day, down the back stairs and out through the kitchen garden and across the orchard, to the shed behind the old apple trees, where a small dark-haired boy was already waiting. Thomas had brought his own stick of charred wood from the kitchen fire. He held it up when he saw her, proud, like a soldier holding up a sword. She smiled at him. It was the first time she had smiled since the night before. "Good morning, Thomas." "Good morning, miss." He sat down on the old crate they had made his stool. She sat on the low wooden bench opposite. She set the slate on her knees. The shed smelled of old straw and of the apples that had been stored there in winters past, a sweet dry smell that clung to the wood. Sunlight came in narrow bars through the gaps in the boards, and where it touched the dust in the air, it turned the dust to gold. "Now," she said, "yesterday we did the letter that says, T. Do you remember?" He nodded hard. "T, it sounds like T." "Yes, very good. And today, we begin something new." She wrote on the slate carefully, 6 letters in a row in her round, clear hand. She turned the slate so he could see it. "This," she said, "is your name." He looked at it. His mouth opened a little. He did not speak. "Thomas," she read, tapping each letter softly with the chalk. "Thomas. This is what your name looks like when it is written down." His eyes stayed on the slate. He reached out with one small dirty finger and did not quite touch it. "That's me?" He said, "That is you." "On paper?" "On paper. On slates. On books. Anywhere a person writes it, this is what it will say." He was quiet for a long time. She watched him. She saw the way his eyes moved, following the shape of each letter, and she saw the way his throat worked as he swallowed. When he spoke, his voice was very small. "Can I do it?" "Yesterday, you will learn how." She took his hand. His fingers were cold, and there was black dirt under his nails, and the palm of his hand was rough for such a small child. She placed the charred stick in his grip, and she wrapped her own hand around his, very gently. "Slow," she said. "We go slow. Down, across, that is a T. Now up, down, across the middle, that is an H. Now around, that is an O." They worked. His hand shook. He bit his lip hard enough that she worried he would draw blood, but he did not stop, and she did not let go, and letter by letter. They made the shape of his name on the old slate. She did not know, and Thomas did not know, that at the top of the great house, in the small round window of the study that overlooked the orchard, a man stood watching. The Duke of Ashworth had risen early. He had not slept much either. He had gone to his study to answer letters, because when he could not sleep he worked. And work at least gave the night some shape. His study was at the corner of the house, high up, and its window looked out over the kitchen garden, the orchard, and the old shed at the far edge of the orchard, where nothing much ever happened. He had glanced out of the window without meaning to. He had seen a flash of pale wheat-colored fabric among the apple trees. He had stopped. He had watched. He watched her cross the orchard. He watched her go into the shed. He watched, though he could not hear a word, as she sat down on the low bench and set a slate on her knees, and beckoned to a child he had not known lived on his estate. He watched her take the child's hand. The Duke of Ashworth stood at his study window for a long time. He did not move. He did not turn away. The morning sun rose over the orchard, and the light came in through the gaps in the shed wall, and inside that shed, unseen and unknown, a woman was teaching an orphan boy to write his own name. He set down the letter he had been holding. He was not aware that he had set it down. He watched until she rose to leave, an hour later. He watched the boy tuck the slate under his arm and run off through the orchard toward the stables. He watched Vivienne Marchant walk back across the grass, slowly, without hurry, her plain gown catching the light. She did not look up at the house. She did not know anyone was watching. The Duke turned from the window. He rang the bell. His steward came, quiet and old and long-trusted. "Your Grace?" "There is a boy on the estate," the Duke said. "Dark hair. 7 or 8 years old. Lives, I believe, in the stable." "Yes, Your Grace. His mother was Betty, from the kitchen. She died in the spring. The boy has been fed and given a place to sleep, but there was no clear arrangement. Make one. Your Grace, he is to have a room, a proper one, in the servants' wing. He is to have clothes that fit. He is to have 3 meals a day at the kitchen table, sitting down, not standing. And he is to have paper and ink and any book he asks for from the library." The steward was very still. He had served 2 dukes before this one, and he had learned long ago not to ask questions that were not asked of him. He said only, "It will be done, Your Grace. Do not tell him from whom the arrangement comes." "Very good, Your Grace. And do not tell anyone else, not the housekeeper, not the head of the stables, not anyone. No, Your Grace." The steward bowed and went out. The Duke stood alone in his study for a long moment. Then he sat down at his desk and picked up the letter he had set aside, and he read it 3 times before he understood what it said. He did not go to the ball that evening, though there was one at the neighboring estate. He did not go into the village. He worked through the day and dined alone and went to bed early, and he lay a long time looking at the ceiling before he slept. 2 mornings later, he stood at the study window again. She came again. He watched again. The boy came running to meet her, and she smiled, and they went into the shed, and the lesson began. He watched every morning for the next 4 days. On the 5th day, he did not go to his study. He walked, instead, in the orchard. He timed it so that he was there when she came out of the shed. He did not intend it to look like a chance meeting, but he did not want her to feel cornered, either. So he stood some distance off near a low stone wall, with his hands behind his back, looking at nothing. She saw him. She stopped. She was carrying the slate under her arm and a small book, and her hair had come slightly loose from its pins in the warmth of the shed. She curtsied. "Your Grace." "Miss Marchant." They stood in silence. A bird called somewhere in the high branches. The air smelled of apples and cut grass and, faintly, of wood smoke drifting from the kitchen chimneys. "You are far from the house," she said at last. "I am on my own land." "Yes," her mouth almost, but not quite twitched. "You are." He looked at the slate under her arm. She saw him look. She did not offer it. She did not explain herself. She stood there and waited. "Miss Marchant," he said. "Your Grace, may I ask you something?" "You may. Why do you teach him?" She was quiet. She shifted the slate under her arm. She looked at him with those tea-colored eyes, and for the first time since he had met her, he saw her guard come up like a door closing. "Who told you?" she said. "No one told me. I saw you from the window. 4 mornings running." "Ah, that does not answer my question." She looked past him, at the orchard, at the pale sky. When she spoke, her voice was low. "Because no one else will. He is not your responsibility." "No, he is no one's responsibility. That is why I go." "His name? Thomas? Thomas?" the Duke said, and he seemed to be turning the name over in his mind. "How long have you been teaching him?" "Nearly 3 weeks now." "And what does he know?" "His letters. He can write his name. He is learning to read from a book of my own which I have brought from home." She paused. "I hope, Your Grace, that this does not, that it is not what? An imposition. On your household, on your kindness. I have used the old shed, and I did not ask permission. You have my permission. Thank you. You had it before you asked." She looked at him then, properly, and he looked back, and for a small, strange moment neither of them said anything at all. The bird called again. Somewhere a horse whinnied. She adjusted the pearl button at her left wrist once, quickly, and then folded her hand back under the slate. "I should return to the house," she said. "My aunt will be looking for me." "Of course." She curtsied and turned to go. "Miss Marchant." She looked back. "Do you require anything for the lessons?" "Paper, ink, books." Her cheeks colored slightly. "You are very kind, Your Grace. But I have what I need. If you should need more, you have only to ask my steward." "Thank you." She walked away across the orchard, and the Duke of Ashworth stood by the low stone wall and watched her go, and he was not aware, for some time, that he was still watching after she had disappeared through the kitchen garden gate. That afternoon, when Thomas came into the kitchen for his midday meal, there was a small parcel waiting for him on the long wooden table. It was wrapped in brown paper and tied with string. There was no card. Cook, who had been told nothing, only pointed at it and said, "That's for you, love. Someone left it." Thomas untied the string very carefully, because he had never received a parcel in his life. Inside was a small blank book of good paper, and a wooden pencil, and a second pencil, and a small penknife for sharpening. He looked up at Cook with wide eyes. "Who?" he began. Cook shrugged, wiping her hands on her apron. "Don't know, love. Just eat your bread." He ate his bread. He did not put the little book down. He ran to the orchard that afternoon, and when Vivienne arrived, he showed her the book with the shining pride of a boy who owns something of his own for the first time in his short life. Her heart caught. She had not sent it. She had not the money to send it. She was quiet the whole way home that evening. That week, an aunt of Vivienne's aunt fell ill in London. Her aunt was called away, and there was a question of what to do with Vivienne. It was decided, after some discussion by letter, that she would remain at the country house until her aunt returned. She was 17 years old, of proper family though poor, and there was no scandal in her staying with the household and its long-serving housekeeper, whom she had come to like very well. She sent a letter to her father to say that she was well, and that she had been asked to a small country dinner or two, and that she would return home before the end of summer. She did not mention that a duke had spoken to her at a ball. She did not mention that a small book had appeared for a boy in a kitchen. 2 nights later, there was a country dinner at Ashworth. The duke had invited 18 people, most of them local gentry, and among them her aunt's household, which now meant only Vivienne and the housekeeper. It was proper for Vivienne to attend. She wore the pale wheat gown again, because she had only one other, and she pinned her hair as neatly as she could, and she came down the long staircase of Ashworth House with her heart very steady, or nearly. Cassian saw her come in. He did not go to her at once. He was speaking to an older gentleman about a matter of tenancy, and he did not break off, because that would have been noted. But he was aware of her from the moment she entered, and he found, to his own private surprise, that he did not need to look at her to know exactly where in the room she was. At dinner, he had arranged for her to be seated 3 places down from him, on the same side of the long table. Not beside him, that would have caused talk, but close enough that he could hear her voice if she spoke. She spoke very little at first. She listened. She answered when addressed. She ate carefully. But when the conversation, near the end of the 2nd course, turned to the matter of the poor of the parish, and one of the older ladies said, with the certainty of a woman who has never gone hungry, that giving too much charity only spoiled the poor and made them lazy, Vivienne set down her spoon. "Forgive me, madam," she said quietly. "I do not think that is quite right." The table went still. Cassian did not turn his head, but every muscle in him listened. The older lady, a Mrs. Pettigrew, blinked. "I beg your pardon, my dear." I said, "I do not think that is quite right. Forgive me. It was not my place to speak. Well, if you have spoken, you had better finish, child. What is not right?" Vivienne's cheeks were pink, but her voice did not shake. "I have known poor families, madam. My father is a country vicar, and I have grown up among them. It is not charity that makes people lazy. It is having nothing. When a person has nothing, they cannot see past today, and they cannot plan for tomorrow, and they cannot lift themselves up because they have no ground under their feet to lift from. A little help, food, clothes, a place to sleep, does not spoil them. It only gives them ground." Mrs. Pettigrew opened her mouth and closed it again. "And schooling," Vivienne added, more quietly. "Above all, schooling. A person who can read is a different person entirely." There was a small silence. Someone coughed. Then Mrs. Pettigrew laughed lightly, in the way ladies did when they were losing an argument and did not want it known, and said, "Well, you are very earnest, dear, very earnest." The conversation moved on. Vivienne picked up her spoon and went back to her soup. Her hand did not shake, but she did not look up for a long time. Cassian looked at her. Just once. She did not see it. After dinner, when the ladies had moved to the drawing-room and the gentlemen had gone to the library for port and cigars, Cassian stood by the fire and let the older men talk. He did not smoke. He drank 1 glass of port and no more. He was thinking. He was thinking that he had never met a woman who was not either performing or pretending. He was thinking that he had spent the past year meeting daughters of earls and daughters of viscounts and cousins of dukes, and every one of them had done something with her voice, or her eyes, or her hands, that was calculated to be pleasing. He was thinking that this quiet vicar's daughter, this girl who stood by a curtain at a ball because no one asked her to dance, had opened her mouth at his own dinner table and told Mrs. Pettigrew, quite politely, that she was wrong. He was thinking that she had taken an orphan boy's hand in a shed and taught him to write his own name. He set down his glass. Over the next weeks he arranged, quietly, to see her. Nothing improper. He rode out in the mornings and passed her on the road as she walked from her aunt's house to Ashworth Land. He came out into the garden while she read on a bench there. He appeared, once, at the door of the shed itself, and stood outside without going in, and listened while she taught. And when the lesson was done, he walked her back through the orchard, and they spoke of small things, of books, of the weather, of the parish. She was still guarded. She did not warm to him quickly. He liked that. He had grown so used to women warming to him that he had come to distrust warmth. Her carefulness felt to him like honesty. When she smiled at him, at last, on the third week of these meetings, it was because he had said something dry about a neighbor, and she had not been able to help it. The smile came and went in a moment. He carried the memory of it into his study that night and set it down like a small pressed flower. He noted things about her, the way she tucked a loose curl behind her ear when she was thinking, the way she paused before answering a question to be sure she meant what she was about to say, the way she never spoke ill of anyone, even when they deserved it, and the way this restraint was not a performance but simply a habit of her mind. Thomas grew brighter every week. He had gained weight. His clothes fit him now. She had asked him once, gently, where the new ones came from. And he had said the housekeeper gave them to him, and that he had a proper bed now in the servants' wing and 3 meals a day at the table. Vivienne had gone quiet. She had suspected, but she had not been sure. She did not ask the Duke. He did not tell her. But one evening in the garden, when he was walking with her along the low stone wall and the light was going gold across the fields, she said, "Your Grace, there is something I should like to say to you, if I may. You may say anything. Thomas has told me that his life has changed, that he is fed and clothed and given a bed. I did not ask for this. I did not expect it." "No," he said. "You did not. Was it you?" He was silent for a moment. He could have lied. Something in her face told him she would prefer he did not. "Yes," he said. "Thank you. You do not need to thank me." "I do. Not for me. For him." They walked on. The sun was low. He watched the shadow of a tall elm stretch across the grass in front of them, moving as they moved. "Miss Marchant, Your Grace, I did not do it for you. I know. I did it because it was right, and it had been left undone, and I had left it undone." "I know," she said again, and this time she looked up at him, and her tea-colored eyes were very clear. "That is why I thank you." He did not know how to answer that. He said nothing, and they walked, and the light went gold and then grey, and it was not until they reached the gate to her aunt's house that he spoke again, and even then he only said, "Good evening, Miss Marchant." "Good evening, Your Grace." He rode home slowly in the dusk. His horse knew the way. He let the reins rest slack in his hands, and he did not urge the animal on. The air smelled of turned earth and of the first faint edge of autumn, though it was still high summer. Somewhere an owl called, low and long. He was thinking that he had made a decision. He was not yet ready to say what it was, even to himself. But he had made it. The trouble came the next week. It came, as trouble often does, in the form of a person no one had been expecting. Her name was Miss Cordelia Thrushfield. She was the daughter of a viscount whose land bordered Ashworth on the east side, and she had known Cassian since they were children, and she had, for at least the last 5 years, been quite certain that she would one day be the Duchess of Ashworth. She had been abroad for the summer, and no one had thought to write to her about the vicar's niece. She returned to find, to her considerable displeasure, that the Duke had been calling in the garden of a plain girl in a wheat-coloured gown. Cordelia Thrushfield was not a stupid woman. She understood at once what had to be done. She could not attack the Duke. That would drive him further off. She had to attack the girl. She chose her moment carefully. There was a garden party at Ashworth in the second week of August, held in the long-walled garden with tea served on the lawn under a striped awning. The Duke had, at his own quiet insistence, asked that Vivienne and her aunt's housekeeper be included, and they had come. Vivienne wore the wheat-coloured gown. Cordelia wore watered silk the colour of pale sea foam, and she carried a lace parasol, and she smiled beautifully at everyone she passed. She waited until Vivienne was standing near the roses with a cup of tea in her hand, and until several of the older ladies were within earshot, and until the Duke himself was just close enough to hear if he cared to. Then Cordelia walked over, still smiling, and said in the sweet warm voice of a woman making conversation, "Miss Marchant, how very kind of His Grace to have you here. Are you enjoying our little country ways?" "Very much, Miss Thrushfield. You must find it all so grand, after what you are used to. I find it very pleasant. I do hope you are not too fatigued. My mother tells me you have been quite the little missionary. Teaching the stable boy his letters, is that so? How very charitable of you." Cordelia's smile widened. "Though I do wonder what your father, the vicar, would say. Charity is one thing, but putting ideas above his station into the head of a poor child, that is quite cruel, is it not? What will the boy do when he can read a little and remembers he is not gentry and cannot rise? You will have taught him nothing but how to be unhappy." The ladies within earshot went still. The Duke, who had been 3 steps away, went still also. Vivienne looked at Cordelia. She did not blink. She did not flush. She did not raise her voice. She said, very quietly, "Miss Thrushfield. A person who can read his own name is not more unhappy for it. He is only more himself." She set her teacup down carefully on the little table beside the roses. She looked at Cordelia with something that was not anger and not pride, but simply a great tiredness. "I would rather teach a child to read and let God arrange the rest than deny him for fear that knowing his name might one day pain him." Cordelia's smile did not move, but her eyes changed. How very earnest. "Yes," said Vivienne. "I have been called that before." She curtsied to Cordelia, exactly as she had been taught, and she turned, and she walked back across the lawn to where her aunt's housekeeper was waiting. She did not hurry. She did not look back. Behind her, Mrs. Pettigrew. The same Mrs. Pettigrew of the dinner table said, quite clearly and to no one in particular, "Well, I rather like that girl." The Duke of Ashworth said nothing. He had heard everything. He watched Vivienne cross the lawn, and he watched her set her cup down on the tray of a passing footman, and give the man a small, warm smile that no one else had ever seen her give. And he watched her take her place beside the housekeeper as though nothing at all had happened. He excused himself from the garden party 10 minutes later. He went into his study. He closed the door. He sat in his high-backed chair by the window, and he did not answer letters, and he did not open the ledger that lay on his desk, and he did not ring for tea. He sat, and he thought. He was a man who solved problems. He had spent his life solving problems. The estate had come to him unwanted, and he had solved it, reorganized the tenants, cleared the debts, brought the North House back into repair. His brother's death had come to him unwanted, and he had solved it too, in the only way such a thing could be solved, which was to keep going. He was 32 years old. He had never once, in all those years, met a problem he could not think his way through. He had a problem now. The problem was this. He had come to understand over the past 2 months that he wanted to marry Vivienne Marchand. He wanted it with a steady, quiet certainty that did not feel like the wanting he had heard other men describe. It was not a fever. It was a knowing. He knew, the way one knows the ground under one's feet is ground, that his life would be better with her in it, and worse without her. But he also knew that she would refuse him if he asked her tonight. She would refuse him because she had been raised by a good and honest man to believe that a woman does not marry above her station without being certain, and she was not certain of him. She had reason not to be. She had known him for 2 months. He was a duke. She was a vicar's daughter with no dowry. If he asked her tonight, she would say no gently and mean it, and it would be years before she said anything else. He needed her to know that he had chosen her already, not asked. Chosen in a way she could not disbelieve. He sat in his chair for a long time. The light went from gold to grey, to blue, to nearly black. At some point a footman came to ask if he wished for lamps. He said yes without turning his head. The footman lit them and went. By the time the clock on the mantel struck 10, he had decided. The next morning, he did not go to the orchard. He did not ride out to meet her on the road. He did not appear at her aunt's garden. He rose early, dressed carefully, and rode into the village. He went first to the vicar's cottage at the far end of the village lane. He was not expected. The maid at the door was so flustered she nearly forgot to curtsy. He was shown into the small parlour. The vicar, a thin grey-haired man with kind, tired eyes, came in wiping ink from his fingers and stopped short at the sight of him. "Your Grace, Reverend Marchant, I did not expect. Please sit, I will stand. Thank you." The vicar sat. He looked, in his rusty black coat, very small and very confused. Cassian did not sit. He put his hands behind his back. He said what he had come to say. "Sir, I have known your daughter for 2 months. She does not know I am here. I have come to ask your permission to court her, properly, openly, with the intention, in time, of asking her to be my wife." The vicar stared at him. Cassian went on, steadily, "I do not ask this because she is beautiful, though to me she is. I do not ask because she is grand, because she is not. I ask because I have watched her for 2 months, and I have seen who she is when she does not know she is being watched. She is the finest person I have met in my life. I would like the chance to earn her." The vicar did not speak for a long moment. Then his eyes filled, and he covered his mouth with his hand, and he said, in a thin, unsteady voice, "She has no dowry, Your Grace. I have nothing to give her but my blessing. That will do. Then you have it." "Thank you." Cassian left. He rode from the village to Ashworth. He wrote 3 letters. He gave orders. And then, that afternoon, he went to the shed at the edge of the orchard. Vivienne was there. So was Thomas. They were bent over the little book, and Thomas was reading aloud, slowly, 1 word at a time. And his voice was full of triumph at each one. She was smiling. She had not seen the Duke in the doorway. Cassian stood there for a full minute before she noticed him. When she did, she rose at once. "Your Grace, Miss Marchant." Thomas stood up and bowed, very seriously. "Your Grace." "Sit down, lad. Finish your word." Thomas sat and finished his word. It was garden. He said it with great care. Vivienne clapped once, softly, and said, "Well done." "Very well done," Cassian said. "Miss Marchant, would you walk with me?" She looked at him. She looked at Thomas. Thomas smiled at her, gap-toothed and unafraid, and she smiled back. "Go on, miss," he said. "I'll finish this page myself." She set the book on the bench. She stepped out of the shed with the Duke into the orchard. They walked. The sun was warm. Bees moved in the long grass. She did not ask him where they were going, because he did not seem to be going anywhere in particular. He seemed only to be walking, and looking at her out of the corner of his eye, and gathering something in his mind that he had not yet found the shape of. At last, near the low stone wall where they had spoken once before, he stopped. "Miss Marchant." "Your Grace, I called on your father this morning." She went perfectly still. The blood left her face and then came back into it. "Sir, I asked him for his permission to court you, properly, openly, with the intention of asking you in time to be my wife." She could not speak. Her lips parted. Her hand went up, without her meaning it, and rested at the base of her throat. "He gave it," Cassian said. "But it is not his permission that matters. It is yours. Your Grace, I am not asking you tonight. I am not asking you next week. I am telling you that I have chosen, that I choose you, that whatever time you need to know your own mind, I will wait. I only wanted you to know that the waiting is not on my side." She looked at him. Her tea-colored eyes were full of something he had not seen in them before, and he could not tell if it was fear or joy, or both together. "Why?" she whispered. "You asked me that before. In a ball. I ask you now." He looked at her. He thought of what to say. He had, for the first time in his life, prepared a speech, and could not remember a word of it. So he said, simply, what was true. "Because I have watched you for 2 months, and in all that time I have never once seen you perform. Not for me. Not for anyone. Because you spoke back to Mrs. Pettigrew about the poor, and I have wanted to say that for years. Because you took a boy nobody wanted, and you sat in a dusty shed, and you taught him his name, when you had nothing to gain by it, and nothing to prove. Because when I sent him a book, you did not preen and you did not gush. You only went quiet, And then you thanked me for him, not for you." He paused. His voice, when it came again, was lower. "Because when Miss Thrushfield insulted you in front of my mother's roses, you set down your teacup, and you told her, without raising your voice, that a boy who can read his own name is more himself, not less. And because when you walked away from her, you gave a footman a smile that I would give the rest of my life to be given once." She was crying now, quietly, without sound. She did not lift her hands to her face. She let the tears come. "That is not a romantic answer, Miss Marchand. I know that. I have not the gift for those. It is only the truth. I have paid more attention to you than you knew, and what I saw is what I have chosen." She adjusted the small pearl button at her left wrist. Once, slowly, he watched her do it, and he understood for the first time that she was doing it not because she was uncertain, but because she was steadying herself for something. "Your Grace," she said. "Cassian, if you please." "Cassian, yes, I do not know how to be a duchess. I do not know how to be a duke. We shall be poor at it together." A small laugh escaped her. It was the second time he had ever heard her laugh. He would remember it, later, as the sound that had changed the shape of his life. "I need time," she said. "You have it. I would like to think. To be sure. Not for you. For me. Yes, and I would like to keep teaching Thomas. He is a permanent member of my household. He will be schooled properly. When he is old enough, he will have a trade or a place, whichever he prefers." Her hand went again to her throat. "You had already decided that. I decided it the morning after I saw you take his hand. I have only not told him because I did not wish him to think it a reward for anything he had done. It is simply what is owed him." She closed her eyes. When she opened them, she looked at him for a long moment. She did not smile. She did not reach for him. She only looked. "Cassian," she said, "yes, I do not need more time." He did not move. He did not breathe. "I have known for 3 weeks," she said. "I did not say. I did not think you had. I thought perhaps I was foolish to hope." "You were not foolish." No, he did not kiss her. He did not sweep her into his arms. That was not how they were. He held out his hand instead, palm up, in the space between them. She placed her hand in his. His fingers closed around hers, slowly, as though he were closing them around something breakable and holy. Her hand was small and cold and steady. His was large and warm. Between them, the small pearl button at her left wrist caught the afternoon sun. They stood like that for a long moment. Neither of them spoke. A bee droned past. Somewhere in the orchard, a small dark-haired boy was reading a word aloud, slowly, and getting it right. The autumn came. There was a wedding at the small village church, quieter than anyone had thought a duke's wedding could be. The vicar, Reverend Marchand, weeping in his rusty black coat, joined his daughter's hand to that of the Duke of Ashworth, in the same church where he had baptized her 17 years before. Mrs. Pettigrew came and cried. Miss Cordelia Thrushfield did not come. She had gone abroad again, quite suddenly, and would not be back for some time. Thomas came. He stood at the front of the church in a coat that fit him and boots that had never been worn, and he watched his teacher become a duchess with a solemn small face, and afterward, when the bells rang, he was the first person she embraced. Ashworth House became, over the next year, a house that people spoke of with a certain puzzled fondness. It was not as grand as it had been. There were fewer parties. But there was a schoolroom now, in the west wing, where the estate's children came every morning, and their duchess taught them their letters, and the boy Thomas, who was 10 now, tall and thin and quick, helped her teach the youngest ones. There were books in every room where there had once been only ornaments. There was laughter in the corridors. One year to the day after the wedding, on a soft evening in September, the Duke and Duchess of Ashworth sat together in the library. It was raining lightly outside. A fire burned low in the hearth. The smell of wood smoke and damp roses drifted in from the open window. She was reading. He was pretending to work at a ledger, and mostly watching her. She looked up. Her hair had come loose from its pins, as it always did in the evenings. She was wearing a plain grey gown. She was, he thought, quite the most beautiful thing that had ever been in this room. "Cassian," she said. "Yes, Thomas wrote a letter today. To my father. All on his own. He wanted to tell him that he has finished the book of poems. Did he sign it?" "He signed it Thomas Marchant Halbrook." Cassian set down his pen. He looked at her across the room. She was smiling at him, that small, quiet smile he had first earned in an orchard, and had, in the year since, earned 1,000 more times. "He gave himself both our names," Cassian said. Yes, that was not asked of him. No, he rose from his chair. He crossed the room to her. He did not speak. He knelt down beside her chair, and he took her hand, the left one with the pearl button at the wrist, and he brought it to his mouth and kissed the back of it, very lightly, and rested his forehead against her knuckles. She set her free hand on the top of his head. Neither of them spoke. Outside, the rain fell softly. Inside, the fire settled with a small, dry sound. Somewhere down the corridor, a boy was reading aloud to a younger child, sounding